So maybe we can start after this very intense 2 days. We're all quite tired, but I'd like to get this last hour as a way of a conclusion of the research meeting. I think we covered quite a lot of ground, and it's been extremely interesting. This is the first research meeting of the Middle East Directions Program. And of course, I think we have fulfilled some of our objectives, which were to try to gather a group of researchers who are extremely qualified and knowledgeable on the issues they're covering, and they bring in their knowledge based on field work and empirical data, which of course are missing elements in the debate about what's happening in the region. I think we have achieved that. The wealth of information and the depth of analysis we got over the couple days, over the 2 days is impressive. And also, I think we also managed to get the right balance between analysis and policy orientation. I think most of the interventions were clearly geared to give inputs and ideas for policy making. So I tried to do some very preliminary observations. We will, of course, reflect on the material we gather over the conference. We'll certainly publish the papers on e-books, and perhaps we do more of these. And as we said at the beginning, this is the very first step of what we hope will be a very long process of a cooperation with a network of very qualified researchers. So, but let's start on the conclusion. We thought it would be a good idea to have an open debate, to have a round table, to get your views on what the future of the program should be in terms of research questions that can help us to reshape the paradigms through which we look at the region. As a main observation, I can say that I think there has been a focus throughout most of the majority of interventions about the importance of local dynamics. This is an element that comes back and intersects the various levels, whether we talk about intrastate or interstate dynamics, whether we talk about what happens in conflict countries, transformations in the religious field, regional or international interventions in those conflicts, the reshaping of the alliances, or the new forms of economic interactions which entail new ways of new flows between the countries of the region and across borders, across including war economies, illegal economies. When all these dimensions that we have been talking about have a strong emphasis on what's happening at the local level. This is clear because the region is undergoing a major transformation. The fragmentation or different dynamics bring more to the fore the local dynamics. Now, as a way of reflecting on it, is one of the questions that comes to my mind as a former policymaker, if I put back my policymaker's quote-unquote hat, is what do we do with this? How can we transform this wealth of information into something that is useful for shaping decisions and for shaping visions from policymakers. This is, I mean, we had a case, I mean, in one of the panels discussing how the different levels, for instance, of local dialogue versus national dialogue interact in conflict resolutions and mediation areas, but there are many others, and I would like to pick your brain on this, and certainly try to see whether we can move from what we have been discussing to a level that is useful. Even in terms of how to shape our research, how to shape our work in the future. The journalists, we have 4 journalists present here today. Barbara Gestri is from former Al Jazeera based, and now freelance journalist based in the Gulf. Cécile Hennion from Le Monde, Alain Gresh from Orient 21, and Catherine Cornet from Internazionale. I think we like to get your views on these issues, from a journalist perspective. I mean, you also are facing a number of puzzles and the need to get a good vision of a good reshaping of the analysis when you look at the region. And so I think the very same type of questions are relevant for you. And then how do we move from empirical analysis to broader trends, which is, of course, another challenge, which is relevant for academia, as after all, we are part of the university. Without further ado, I would certainly pass the floor to our journalist friends. Perhaps we go from Catherine at the end of the table, and then, of course, our panelists can also interject or intervene in an open way. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It was extremely interesting these 2 days. And well, yesterday I left you for a short period. Yesterday evening I went to a meeting presenting a book on art in Syria during the war. Yeah, it was Syria of Frame. It's called, and it's a very interesting experience made by the Benetton Foundation. And I was speaking together with one of the senior editors of the Corriere della Sera, Franco Venturini, who is a really senior editor, speaking, really writing about the Middle East all the time. And after we spoke about Syria and how important Syrian, artistic sphere was, and society, and how beautiful the country was, he actually said, well, I think it's the first, I've never written any piece on any artistic thing in Syria in my life. I mean, he's been writing on the main Italian newspaper for 30 years, maybe, and he's never covered anything that is linked straightly to society. I think the problem now is this transformation and these wars, because with journalism, the problem we have, it's a lot of dead body counts, and I work for a weekly, which is not even a daily, but we always have to deal with how many dead people were. I mean, last week there were 60 people dead in a market in Baghdad, and we thought it wasn't, enough to be covered. And you think, where are we going, yes, with this kind of information? Because it's too much. So we are covered by this dead body, by these wars, and we are not able to tell anymore any of the abnormal normality of life. And we are taking completely away the subjectivity of the Arab world. We're taking, it's like, for instance, there are no stories about women, since women don't always do wars. So if you, even you, these 2 days, even the research, and that's where going on my indication, is that we're so overwhelmed by these questions of war. Obviously, it's normal, but we are not covering anymore a lot of daily issues. We're not speaking about economy anymore. We're not speaking about society issues, and we're not speaking about culture anymore. If you see in the 2 years of the Arab Spring, we were going back to all these issues. Everybody was interested in the economy of the Arab world, what was going on, why people had revolted. And today, well, you have some people will deal with the economy, but the journalism is not following at all these trends. And we're not following, and the research is not following either. We're all taken into this war situation, which is, as we know, not the principal thing. So for me, going back also to society, I'm speaking from a European point of view. We are facing a problem with our public is becoming more and more racist, to say really the words. So we also have this situation where we're making the Arab world, Arabs as Muslims as objects. They are war objects. They are either warriors or refugees. And we're not, and we are dealing in our societies with racist people, so we're not making it much better. So, and not even wanting it, I mean, not even building on, so this is one thing, I mean, that was the most interesting part, speaking about local situation and society. You know, let's not forget that they're not just warrior and war, no? You can see this because there's no cover of women. In 2 days, nobody spoke about a woman, because you know that's a test. It's not like not just a question of feminist issue, but it's a question of, and they're there too, I guess. You know, it's like this is for me. This is the main thing, especially in a situation where I read the Arab press since like 13 years, and it's really the moment where it's very, very difficult to get information from the press. The Arab press is living the same situation that the global press is living in terms of economic crisis, obviously, but also of censorship that has come back in a very dramatic way. So information from the ground is always more difficult to get, and I think that's really one of the things that the researchers. That is the main role of the researchers to do.
Thank you. Also, I think it's courageous what you said. I don't agree with all of it, but anyway, like we have the female fighters in Kurdish area, and I think everybody spoke about it, and it's quite also a cliche, and it's good to avoid the cliche everywhere we could find it. And what was very interesting for me during this day, because sadly I wasn't there yesterday, is as we saw the local point of view and the local situation was so important to observe and to understand better the broader situation. And of course, to understand the local situation, you need people on the ground, which is mainly journalists when they're not killed, and researcher, as we saw a lot of you were having work also based on the ground. Then, if we also from all those conflicts we have talked about, they have in common to be local, but also regional and also international. And if we see history. Of course, it's not the first time that we're facing such a crisis. And if we think about maybe Lebanese war or even ex-Yugoslavia war or even before, at the end, the very big policymakers were the one or two on the top sitting at the table and saying, okay, now we stop. And then whatever was on the ground finally was resolved, not maybe for the best, but at least there were no more deaths every day. As you said, we're just covering the deaths. It's quite depressive for journalists right now. I think as journalists we are stuck between the ground and also the diplomats that we meet and that we talk to. And I think the researchers are in this middle place, which is so interesting, and maybe we're missing some of the links there to send some news, not only based on the ground of policy makers, diplomats, what they're thinking, but also researchers, the way they can understand or bring new concepts. Even if I have to say that some of the concept today was quite irrational for me today, which I don't want to make any enemies, but like, I'm sorry, I'm just speaking about as a silly journalist, but like, checkpoints have been there since ages, and they're just, for me, a basic, the first stage of security. And I thought it was brilliant to see it as a strategy or something, but on the ground, I was asking myself, well, what can we make of that, you know? Or do I care if a border is diffracted or fragmented? For me, it's you cross the border and you're safe, or you don't cross it and you die. Or maybe you have to smuggle yourself, which is an even more complicated story. I can really understood how brilliant it was, and I say, wow, what a thinking. But in the same way, it was difficult for me to apply it on the ground situation. But I think it opened some windows of understanding for me, so thank you. I hope I... Anyway, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, because the panelists were also interesting. So really thanks for inviting me to the conference, Luigi. Well, coming from the Gulf region, I know this conference was not about the Gulf, but coming from the Gulf region, I was hoping to hear more about the influence of Gulf states into the developments in in North Africa and the Levant, although some of the panelists have touched on it. The reason being that I was hoping to hear from you, from your research on the ground, what's your perspective? Because living in Qatar, we deal with the policymakers there, and we see things happening behind the scenes, but then we don't know how what really happens on the ground, and what happens to the decisions they make in their offices in Doha or in Abu Dhabi or in Riyadh, and how that all translates into what's really going on in the field. It has become really difficult to obtain in-depth analysis about policy making in the Gulf countries. There is very little being done by the local think tanks and analysts that are working there and are based in the Gulf region, because the governments, the royal families, the apparatuses that are there are becoming very, very cautious in dealing with journalists in general, and also with analysts. They are very much aware of the leverage they have because of their financial power, and so lately we have seen this very interesting trend, in my view, whereby think tanks are no longer providing analysis and advice or consultancy, but are rather being used by the Gulf leaderships to propagate their own agenda, because somehow they have all become, they have all been put on the payroll of the Qatari government or the Emirati government or the Saudi government. So that's why I was saying it's very difficult for us, being based in the Gulf, to get information, first-hand information on what's going on. So mine is a sort of appeal to you, because there is maybe a lot on countries in North Africa and the Levant right now, but what's happening in the Gulf countries is very important for the dynamics as well in these countries, because we were all taken by surprise. I mean, people that were not in the covering the Gulf region, and there were very few, when we discovered that suddenly the Qataris or the Emiratis were taking sides in some of the countries in North Africa in the aftermath of the Arab Springs. But Doha, for instance, has been this amazing political laboratory for 10 years before the beginning of the Arab Springs, we were seeing Islamists coming there for meetings and for talks, and from every Arab and Asian country, actually. So what is happening today is the result of, I think, more than a decade of political work that has gone almost unnoticed, I would say. So I think the Gulf region is very important for what's happening in the rest of the Arab world, and there is a desperate need for you to be there and do field work, research, analysis, and my suggestion, if I can conclude with this, is to come to the Gulf and not only talk to the, or rather avoid talking to the institutional partners, or to the Westerners, or to the people that you might meet within the apparatus, and rather talk to the students, to the universities, to the local journalists that work for obscure magazines that seem to have no relevance at all, but in the end cannot publish anything they know, but know a lot. And I wish they could be part of these meetings as well. And talk to the businessmen, because as of late, I've got a lot of information that I couldn't get from officials, from the business partners. And that's an incredible, I think, well of knowledge that goes untapped lately. So I hope I've been of some help. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the question of the roundtable was, do policymakers need new paradigm? I think we should also think about it, because we have, I think, a very important change happening in Europe at least. I don't think at any other moment in the European policy toward the Middle East and North Africa the internal factor has been so important, and especially the question of Islam. Of course, since 1967, the Israeli-Palestinian war has always some internal aspect in France or other country. But now, Islam is becoming a central problem in the European world. And the way we see, the leaders see Islam has consequence in the way they act in the Middle East and North Africa. And I think this is, rapidly saying, very dangerous, because there is this idea of an Islamic threat, Islamist threat, terrorism, Islamist terrorists, which in one way or other impact our policy in the Middle East. And I think the people who are doing research has an important role in trying to change. I know it's not easy, this view. And also to begin, and I have no answer to be very frank, I think we are really in a new period, which the region and the world are completely changing. And all the paradigms which we were having, which was the Cold War or just after the Cold War, are changing also. The place of the United States in the region and Europe is totally changing. The place of the big local or regional power is changing. The possibility of one power like United States to change things on the ground is weaker than it was at any other moment. And we should think, when we speak about European policy, not only on what is possible, but what are we able to do. It's not only to take position, it's always easy, but how to change things, especially in a time where it seems that everything is changing on the ground. We have a failed state now in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, and we have this question of Shia and Sunni, and has the state a future, etc. We should really think about how to try to think differently about this society. And on this, I will agree with what Barbara said about what we are doing, and I speak as a journalist, when we go to this region. I have been following Saudi Arabia for 20 years. And once I wrote, look, I'm really, I wrote it in the article. I have made a two-page article in Le Monde Diplomatique, which is very long, and I began to say, I'm not sure what I am writing is correct. Because I noticed that everybody writing in France about Saudi Arabia was writing exactly more or less the same things. Because all of us were seeing the same people. I mean, diplomats, some intellectuals, some businessmen, but we didn't have any real contact with the real Saudi society. And this is a problem, and I don't have an answer. It's not so easy to enter the Saudi society. It's a very complex one. There is a question of language, but not only. But I think from what we can think about the Arab Spring is the fact that, you know, there was all this talks about nobody has seen the Arab Spring coming. And it was more or less the same as what happened in Soviet Union. Why? Because in Soviet Union, we were all looking at the political bureau and saying who is number 2 after Brezhnev and who is number 3, and you had articles and articles saying, okay, this is a change, etc. But very few people want to see on the ground what was changing in the Soviet society. And I think we have more or less the same problem now. There are many changes in the Arab society, and I could say in some way I'm optimistic, because what has began in the Arab Spring is not changed. There will be there are some setbacks, but I don't think it's possible that we return to the before 2011. And so we have, I mean, as researchers, as journalists, to try to think about it. We organized, I mean, and we are still organizing a kind of network of independent website of the Arab world with some of European. And you see, there is really a very important dynamics. And it's true that you have more censorship, but at the same time, you have things written in the local newspaper or in the internet, etc. So I think we can do many things with this, and we can help to show that there is a society, and also that in any case, the way, I don't know how the region will be rebuilt. I mean, this will depend on the people. But what I have learned, at least from the Arab Spring, is it will be the people who will build it. It will not be imposed to them. Will it be decentralization, state? I don't know how it will be rebuilt, but I think it will be rebuilt with people and with the young generation. Meaning, you said, I think it's not only the fact that journalists writing in obscure magazine, but also this new generation of journalists. We know, I mean, for my generation, I know some Arab journalists, and it's always the same who are speaking, and we know what they say. But there is this new generation. I think we should count on them for dialogue and for transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alain. And perhaps now we can go in reverse order and have our researchers responding or commenting.
So I think I will follow up on what Alain Gresh just mentioned, that, I think we need a new paradigm because our old paradigm doesn't work. So we have questions that we cannot answer. For example, the famous understanding that if you would like to face radicalization, you need just to go for democracy. And that's how it works. And then you look at Tunisia, which is the only positive example of a democratic transition. It's the country that sent the highest number of jihadists to Syria. And then you ask yourself, so how come something is wrong? So that's a question that the paradigm cannot answer, that our tools cannot deal with. Then you have, for example, a second question that we were always thinking that Islamic parties, the best way that they have to differentiate between what's religious and what's political. And that's the way to do it. And then Nahda is doing it, and then all of a sudden we are looking like, no, because if Nahda doesn't work on the religious sphere, the religious sphere is empty for the jihadists to fill the gap. So maybe they should not actually separate. Maybe they should find a way, a new balance. So those are questions that our old paradigms cannot answer. That's why we need to come up with new tools, new concepts, new way of seeing things. The other thing which related more to how we do field work. So if you'd like to work on the Muslim Brotherhood before 2011 or before 2013, it's easy. I mean, you go to Egypt, you have an appointment with the persons at the garden of Al Marriott Hotel in Zamalek, you meet the leadership, you get the information, you go back and you write the article, and it's a very nice article. Now you cannot do it anymore. You cannot have field work in the garden of the Marriott in Zamalek. You have to meet the activists on the ground because the leadership, they're either in prison or in Istanbul, they are not aware of what's going on the ground. So you need to try to talk to the people who are really leading the struggle on the ground. So that also imposes new challenges to the researchers. So the easy research is over. Now we have to kind of get connection, build trust, and try to meet people and double-check information, as was said, because developments are so fast. And for example, if you're working in the Muslim Brotherhood, what a guy from Cairo would tell you will be different from what a guy from Alexandria will tell you. And you have to double-check because you cannot base your field work on only one voice.
Thank you. Yes, I think one challenge all of us are facing and will be facing for really years to come is that on the one hand, things are changing very quickly all the time, but we also know that things are changing very quickly and will be changing very quickly for a very long period of time. So we are in a situation where basically, to take, for example, the Syrian uprising, it begins with, protests, demonstrations, then you have fighting, you keep on going, you have the use of chemicals for the first time, only the second time since World War I. Then you have the intervention of Russia for the first time since the Cold War. And so you just realize that all of these things were always unexpected. Now we are talking of decentralization, of fragmentation, and we just realize that these things can keep going on and on and on, and we never know where this is going to end. At the same time, given that we know that this is going to last for a long time, we have the luxury of, I don't know if it's a luxury, but we have the obligation to work on long-term trends. So how do you work on long-term trends while you have short-term changes all the time? And I think that's an issue we have to face. And all this is happening while, as Mr. Gresh said a bit earlier, we don't know what models to follow. I mean, we are really lost. 20 years ago, you had the Barcelona process. You had this, I grew up in Europe. In 84, you have Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl hold their hands in Verdun. But today, Europe is frightening. Europe is really frightening in many ways. And when you have what the policies towards migrants, you just realize that, okay, what are you telling people? I mean, what political model are we working on? European unity has today we are seeing it failing. Okay, not formally it hasn't failed, but fundamentally we know that it's no more what it used to be 30 years ago. So what is it going to be? And that's also a challenge. So in terms of policy making, what model can we build our thoughts on? I think something important quickly is the relation between Mashra and Maghreb. I think very often we don't realize enough in Europe how the links between the Mashra and the Maghreb are very limited. Myself, I had Algerian friends and Moroccan friends because I was in Paris, but in Syria and Lebanon, I almost never see them. And the other way also works, and this is quite interesting. And we meet in Europe, actually. We don't meet and anyway, that's something I think we need also to think about it. Finally, the Arab uprisings have put at the center stage again economics. I think this is very, very important because again, we know, I think one of, there is this dictatorship of the GDP and the GDP per capita and the GDP growth, and we are all obsessed are looking at these graphs going up and down, while we know that the GDP growth of Egypt has been 6% for 10 years and unemployment was still increasing, and it did introduce poverty. How do you handle this? And this is a global issue. It's not a coincidence that Sanders in the US In the US, you have a left-wing, quite radical by American standards, who is, who is winning. We have Tsipras in Greece, we have Podemos in Spain, but we don't really have answers. We don't have clear models. I mean, these people are, offering, they are supposed to offer new solutions, but we saw with Tsipras, we thought he was bringing something new, and he failed. So we don't have the experience of any government anywhere that has capitalized on the discontent to propose something new. But we need to propose something. We know that there is a need for something new, and this is also a challenge, I think. Thank you.
I attended actually a round table in Tunisia a few weeks ago. It was a nice experience because it was one of the political parties who was defeated who lost the last elections. He got 0 deputy in the new parliament, making its auto-evaluation, autocritique. And one of the leaders of the party told, the 20th century ends on the 14th of January 2011 in Tunisia. So it was really interesting because it makes me think about the Hobsbawm concept of long century and small. But it was really interesting to hear that one of the political leaders is telling that really after 2011 things are becoming really different and a new century starts in Tunisia. That is to say that really Tunisia, but also the Arab world, something new, and a new era started in 2011 in the Arab world. So we need really to think deeply about what are the deep changes now happening or occurring in the Arab world. I think it's important to build bridges between academia and policy making, and we need really now to think about the trends of what are the future trends in the Arab world. It becomes really important because we can see that politics of waiting is prevailing in the Arab world. Everybody is waiting. Youth are waiting, is waiting for jobs, etc. But even the people who are in the government, they are waiting for something, for change, for something. There is a problem of imagination maybe, but there is problem also of lack of how to identify the prospects, the leverage of actions, how things are. There is a new era, and we need really to think deeply about the trends, about the policies, and the role of policy making research or policy making policy-oriented research is really to help on this, and I think the connection between the academia, the university, and could play and help a lot on this field. Maybe just I want to join Barbara on the comment that the Gulf region is playing an important role. Actually, in Tunisia, we have keep saying that now it seems that the Arab world, the centre de gravité, the center has moved from Egypt and Syria to the Gulf region. And we can see that all these dynamics the Gulf states are playing an important role. I attended another roundtable in Tunisia with young people, and it was about the Tunisia in the world and the change in the region, and the debate was basically about what are the prospects, what are the changes in Syria, what are the future of the Syrian crisis, the future of the Libyan crisis, etc. That is to say, what is the role of the Saudis, Emiratis, etc. So this is really important, and we can the role played by the Saudis in Egypt, in Libya, with the Emiratis. These proxy wars. It's something important. The other thing we need really to think deeply about is the breakdown of social contracts. We talked about social contracts in yesterday, and Ruth presented a nice presentation of social contract. I think there is a big problem now that in many countries, and let's talk just about Tunisia and Egypt, there is, the Bourguibist or Nasserist social contracts are definitely broken. So and we need really to figure out what are the consequences of this on the future of these countries. We can, the unemployment is rising, poverty, migration, etc. The legitimacy of the political systems is at play, but also, the transformation of how people are being governed in these countries. The fact that the insecurity is becoming almost something usual and something daily phenomena. This is important because I think even the police, its role is not to enforce the law, but really to maintain a social order. And how to maintain it through low-cost policies, through repression, so it's important to link these dynamics and to think deeply about the effects or the consequences of the breakdown of social contracts in these countries. The other thing or the other issue important that we need really to think about is the militarization of many societies now in the Arab world. Libya, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, etc., and this brutalization of these societies. So this is really important. What are the effects? Not just in terms of conflict resolution, but also in terms of building those societies or rebuilding them, building these states after the end of the civil wars, etc. And it will require a lot of efforts and a lot of, thinking and ideas. I think really policymakers in the Arab world need imagination, and the role of the experts of academia, scholars, etc., is also to think about tools for the decision making and to propose maybe at least indications for the trends in for the future of the region. Thank you.
All right, I'll try to keep it brief. I would like to focus on what I see as one of the key challenges for researchers and policymakers in the future, which is to know more about failed states in particular, because that's something we will have to live with in our neighborhood in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya. I think all the situation in this country should be approached as probably a durable pattern in at least some of these countries. It's not an interlude. I don't think it makes sense to speak of a crisis in a country like Syria today. It's not a crisis. It's just a new context in its own right, and probably a durable one. Of course, the reconstruction of states is a desirable goal in the long term, but I don't think it should be pursued at all costs, and certainly not by pushing for the reconstitution of exclusive authoritarian states, which is probably a temptation that's present among certain Western governments. This kind of nostalgia of the past, of past stability. We also see that, I think, we've seen it at least in Syria with this obsession with preserving the so-called institutions of the Syrian state, when in fact this exclusive but resourceful authoritarian state has been more destructive probably than any kind of chaos. So the priority should be to understand how a decent level of order and service provision can be re-established, but that's not necessarily through the hasty reconstitution of the Leviathan of a centralized and authoritarian state. So it's very important to know, and that's something we've discussed this morning, how and when local authorities or non-state military actors can operate as relatively functional and ideally inclusive providers. And providers of order and services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We still have 10 minutes for some additional comments or questions, so I open the floor to the room.
Fashion to go with the sort of sexy themes. You might be an expert on fish, but then there's diseases on dogs, and suddenly sort of people become dog experts, even though they've never worked on dogs. I remember when I started working on Yemen, I struggled to find 2.5 proper experts who knew anything about Yemen. A week after the beginning of the military intervention, there were hundreds of self-declared Yemen experts who had absolutely no clue what they were talking about. They were just copy-pasting tweets that they have read, but it was the sexy subject, which does not help us on the policy side in any way or form. So my request to you would be, stick to your subject, which might not be sexy one day, but will be sexy again maybe a few weeks later, and we will need it at some point. Thank you.
So yeah, I'm quite concerned about like what has been happening in the last couple of years, as well, in the last several years, as something that had to do with the withdrawal of the US one way or another from the region, and that has allowed room for many changes. However, it seems that it has created a vacuum that is not being filled by anybody. I'm not very optimistic about the future role of the Gulf. I do agree that like countries like Syria and Iraq have most probably ceased to exist. We just like visualize that they are there. A country like Egypt has become quite dependent on the Gulf, but then like the Gulf with its paycheck diplomacy, I don't think is very resourceful in actually creating mechanisms for the management of the region, especially with like if we are talking about like another 10 years, for instance, of plunging oil prices. So I don't know. Like I think that at a certain moment we'll be asking for Americans to come back or something. So yeah, really, it's like I'm thinking so, which is a very, very dampening idea. It's like asking for like to be reintegrated into the empire so that like things become less messy. So I don't know. Thank you. Well, we can tempt them. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Just a thought on the question of policy relevance and speaking to policymakers. Listening to you, and beyond that, I'm often wondering what that actually means in this period, because we've discussed a lot of issues that I don't see immediate solutions for or productive suggestions as to how to deal with these issues. So maybe joining into that call of stick to your topics would also be a call to say not everything has to be immediately policy relevant. In many cases, it's also simply about understanding dynamics and letting different policymakers or agencies come to their own conclusions about that, but not trying to channel it from the very beginning in such a way as to be immediately policy relevant. Thanks.
Just a reaction to you too, and maybe I speak here for all academics, I don't know. But I'm really heartened by your reaction and actually the point that we should stay academics to actually remain relevant. Yeah, but we do need money. In the sense that, like, there's a, yeah, exactly, thank you. No, not in the sense that I'm begging here. But this is, of course, what's been happening to academia all over the world, and you know this as well. That this is the reason why there's suddenly 100 self-declared Yemen experts, not because, well, because it's such a sexy topic and because that's where the money is.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to learn a lot from all these people around here. I would just keep on advising not to lose the material underpinnings of what is going on. It's very interesting to debate, about religion and so on and so forth, but if you don't talk about food and how society is changing from within, if we don't think about areas that have been abandoned because the governance system has changed and there's no investment and so on, I think looking into the economics, the microeconomics of those societies in the whole region as well as in Europe, I think that is a challenge that should not be missed, because otherwise everything else, without the structure, everything else would be just not based on grounded truth.
I'm going to bang the Libya drum again. Just to congratulate the Institute yet again for including so many papers on Libya during the last couple of days. Really, you know, I attend many conferences and forums on the region, and I'm always struck by the fact that Libya is usually absent completely. So it's great to see such a focus on Libya. And I think those of us who work in Libya, apart from the fact that it's a country that was so isolated under Gaddafi, diplomats and researchers were missing so many frames of references with which to understand Libya after 2011. Now we're dealing with a situation where, because most of the internationals evacuated Tripoli in 2014 and haven't been back since, we're dealing with ambassadors and senior diplomats in European capitals who have never actually set foot inside Libya. So their understanding of what's going on the ground is really, really superficial. So now more than ever, there is a great need for research that is very, very granular when it comes to what's happening inside. And as Virginie knows, we're all under pressure from our respective embassies as well, people not wanting us to go into Libya and actually do the field work that is required in order to have a better understanding of the dynamics in there. So just like, again, to thank you for having such a focus on Libya.
Sorry, thank you. Just a brief comment to join you. Reaching out to policymakers also requires policymakers to know what academia is. When you see the French government opening up postings in Islamology, as if it was a way to understand what's happening in the French society, not understanding that it is French sociologists, specialists of the French society that could understand those problems. That's a problem. And just because I was targeted by some criticism, I personally think that we have also, because we talked of journalists and scientists, we, as if we were doing the same job. We're not, and as important as fieldwork might be, our first field is the library also. That is our work also. And I personally think that theory in that respect has a social utility. We're not just masturbating over theory. So yeah, I think and just to join you also, when I see people like us, like political scientists, experts or proto-experts on societies in the Middle East, in the media, speaking of as if we were, just because something happens in France or in Europe related to Islam, because we're studying societies in the Middle East, we're not, it doesn't make us legitimate to speak about anything related to Islam, especially in Europe. So I fully agree with reaching out to policymakers, but policymakers have to understand what we're doing also. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have come to the end of this 2 days. I'm sorry.
Yes, I would like to react to the press being sexy first. Very sadly enough, to speak about Syria, Syria is not sexy anymore to anyone on the press. And it's true that because information is running now so fast and uncontrolled on the net, even like the big medias, let's say, they try somehow to be sexy. It's a pity, really, to get the attention of the audience. And of course, like all those wars, the situation we're talking about, it's mainly okay to find a solution, but then it's also how to make the audience concerned, because they are the one who can push their political people, the policymakers, to do something, to act for change. And the press is supposed to get the audience. In fact, there is the crisis of the press, as we all know, but it's also because all those conflicts has become so ideological. Mainly, like I can tell you, you can print a horrible picture of children being killed by chemicals. The main reaction will be from readers like, oh my God, this little boy on the front, he doesn't look dead to me. I mean, this is truly what we got as the reaction. And on the same way around on different matters, it's not sexy anymore, and it's more and more difficult to go on the ground to get the impression of the people on the field, and so we really need, and I really didn't want to upset anyone, but truly there is a need of connection with researchers and journalists who work so fast that they can go as deep as researchers, and we're more like needing each other. I think that's my point.
If I can just add something that I think you'll speak about later with Giulio Reggiani, is that we haven't faced this, but researchers and journalists are targets. And are big targets now that they weren't that much before, not at that level. And I mean, when you speak about Egypt, we don't know exactly, but now it's difficult to be a journalist in Egypt, even when you're a foreigner, and not feeling threatened. So it's a question, and if you want to link it to the problem of funding, journalists who go in the field are usually freelancers. They have no protection. And at best, their embassies tell them not to go. So we do have a problem, which is very big, which is protection and funds, because it's not the same to be a correspondent and to be an independent journalist. And this is a huge issue in reality for today.
Just one remark. I think really the problem in Europe, at least, is the story. In which framework we understand what's happening on the ground. Nobody asks any politician to understand every groups in Yemen or in Syria. The most important thing is how they see what's happening. And today, mostly they see it through terrorism and Islam. This is the way they are reading it. And it's not a question of knowing or not knowing. And as you know, I don't know if there are 150 experts on Yemen today, I doubt it, but you have 1,500 experts on terrorism. And it's them who give the story of what's happening. And this is one of the most important things we must change. And I think we can change it. I mean, we can change it. We have a fight to go. And you said that it's not because I'm working on Yemen that I can speak in the French television about Islam. I'm not sure. You have a legitimacy because you have been there, and you can say things that the expert on terrorism will not do. And this, I think, is one of our responsibility. Even to say it's not, there is no relation, but I think it's important to be, sometimes I find that the researcher, and I can understand them, they look at the television and they say, we don't want to go there. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, we are people ignorant, etc. But I think at the same time, it's a duty to do it because it has consequence on our work and the way we see things, and also, I think, the future of the region.
So I feel kind of obliged to defend researchers. So, for example, like the place where I work at now, Carnegie, they've been issuing reports, articles, recommendation that the US should not interfere in Iraq in 2003. The US decided to ignore this. I mean, the administration decided to go into Iraq, and this is the result. So the researchers, they did what they could do. They issued recommendation. They said, this is wrong. You should not do this. They did whatever, and everything they could do just to convince the Bush administration not to do it. At the end, they did it. So this is our role. I mean, we don't claim expertise. We think that we know things. We think that we do field work, and we are trying to influence policymakers. And we are doing it for the simple reason that the decisions taken by policymakers affect all of us. It's not like their own field. So at least we give advice, and then you are always like free to take it or not. And throwing the ball back to you, our problems as researchers trying to influence policymakers that you talk to junior diplomats or diplomats. And they seem like to understand the situation. Like you said, like you should not do this, you should not do that, this is how it works. And they seem like, yeah, we understand, we know. And then the decision comes from the top level completely different. So you talk to them, it's like, what's wrong? He said, no, we give them all the information. But it seems that policymakers, they don't take decision based on information, they take it based on interest. And that's a different story.
Well, it's a very lively debate. I still personally believe that it's the role of researchers to provide information, and this information may or may not influence decisions, but it's at least is out there, and nobody can claim that things were ignored. So it's important that we do make an effort to convey our messages to the policymakers and make sure that it's also to the wider public, because it's a question of public information. So I think we have come now to the end of this very, very lively debate and this very intense 2 days. On behalf of the Middle East Directions Program and Virginie Colombier and Martin Egan, who have helped me to put together this very intense program, we would like to thank all of you for participating and contributing to this very interesting debate. We hope it will be at the beginning of a good relationship to bring research on the Middle East forward. Thank you very much.